Welcome to Bookmas. I am the protagonist Pub. My name is Tammy, and this is where characters gather. And as you could already know from the title, this is a continuation of the great content debate. And today we're going to talk about Elizabeth Chadwick. She is one of my favorite historical fiction authors ever. I discovered her on my Nook app when I picked up the first of her Eleanor of Aquitaine series. And the first one of those is The Summer Queen. And here's all three covers. And I was skeptical going in. Eleanor of Aquitaine is one of my favorite historical characters, women of all time. She led a fascinating life, and her impact on Western Europe cannot be overestimated and is in fact largely ignored in recent times to make false political points. And thus, I was very skeptical going in. Chadwick is published by big name publishers in the States and in the UK and around the world. So that obviously colored my reactions going in. However, I will tell you, I binge read the entire Settle Down Eleanor of Aquitaine series in less than a week. They were absolutely fantastic. So let's talk a little about Elizabeth first, and then we'll talk about the books. So she is 11 years older than I, so she is not that old. She didn't sell her first book to a publisher until 1989. So, she does not have a backlist that goes back for decades. Well, it does go back for decades, but not as far as you would think given her age. And she always knew she wanted to write, and she just kept plugging away at her craft until she got a publishing contract. Persistence and constantly improving your craft pays off, and it paid off wonderfully for readers in the stories she has crafted. She writes medieval fiction set in England, and they are meticulously researched. They are beautifully written, and for the most part, they all involve real life people that she takes and crafts the meat onto the bare bones that history has left behind. So, that's just a little bit. She's married, she has kids, she's just a perfectly normal human being. And like I said, she puts the meat on the bones that history has left. So, Eleanor of Aquitaine, we know a lot about her life, her marriage, what she did and where. But what we don't know is the intimate, personal, everyday minutia that, makes up anyone's life. And to be able to craft that into a story that honors the past and makes a historical figure real was just a beautiful experience. And like I said, I binge read the Eleanor of Aquitaine books, like boom, 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 one right after another. And I was thoroughly enamored. They are these incredibly realistic writings that take a very powerful woman and a very powerful man and a marriage that produced children that affected English society for hundreds of years after their births. And that is no joke. It's hundreds of years. So she was married to Henry II, and Henry by himself is a fascinating character, and he gets so much of the spotlight. And Eleanor gets some, but not nearly to the extent that Henry does. And the books change this. They portray Henry as the volatile man that he, history bears him out to be. And without making him this, over the top supervillain that is unbelievably horrible. And they show in the book show Eleanor as having the spine and the self-confidence and the mental, emotional, intellectual fortitude to stand up to this powerhouse of a man to whom she was married. And it is a beautiful experience. I will tell you that, in particular, in the Eleanor series, there are scenes between Eleanor and Henry. And remember, they're a married couple that, would exist on the spice scale. Where it lands on the spice scale is, of course, utterly subjective. And there is a great quote on Elizabeth's About Me page on her website, and I will link her website in the description box down below. And her book just got sold, and she's out to lunch with her husband and her new publisher, and her new publisher says to her, "I adore your love scenes," enthused my new editor. "They're erotic without being pornographic." "Yes," grinned my husband. "I'm the research assistant." I can only speak from personal experience. I didn't find them too much. And as it, if I wrote something and I handed it to Dave to read and he was uncomfortable reading it, assuming I wrote quote unquote erotic, not pornographic love scenes, that would be an indication to me personally that the quote unquote spice level in the book was too much for my spouse. So if it's too much for my spouse, I'm certainly not going to, let that go out into the universe for all time and eternity. Now, again, what her husband is comfortable with is, completely subjective between them. But it's nice to know that when she wrote it and he read it, it wasn't so over the top that he was uncomfortable. In fact, from that quote, and you can only assume that quote is accurate, that he's proud of her. And for me, that says a lot. There are, scenes specifically in the Eleanor of Aquitaine series that are disturbing, but they were they were handled respectfully, and B, they were an accurate historical reflection, looking back on what had to have been a very volatile marriage given the personalities involved. So, hang on, Felicities. Okay. You gonna come say hi to the nice people? Okay. So, I was perfectly comfortable in the series. I loved it immensely. I had no complaints. And I do have 6 more of her books sitting here on my shelf I'm going to talk about in a minute. She has written a total of 30 books. Her last book was published in 2023. I don't know if she's still writing. Her writing appears to have slowed down in the last, 5 to 7 years, which is fine. She doesn't need to be, pumping out books every, year to, 6 months to a year like some authors do, as a woman who's in her late 60s. So, what do I have sitting next to me? Well, let's talk about them. First up is a standalone, and that is A Marriage of Lions. And I bought this last year. I will read you the back. I so want to read this book. England, 1238. Raised in the court of Henry III as a chamberlain to the Queen, young Joanna of Swanscombe life changes forever when she comes into an inheritance far above all expectations, including her own. As she grapples with her change in status, Joanna's arranged marriage to the king's charming, tournament-loving half-brother, William de Valence, causes ripples among established courtiers, angered by the privileges bestowed on newcomers. While Joanna and William strive to build a life together, England descends into a bitter civil war. The newlyweds falter as William is forced to run for his life, and Joanna must use her wit and courage to outfox their enemies and prevent them from destroying everything she and William hold dear. Now, a constant theme in Chadwick's books is strong women. We all know how I feel about strong women characters, and she never writes a weak-willed, nilly, shallow, vapid woman. Okay, so next up are 2 series I have sitting on my shelf. One complete, one incomplete. So let's do the incomplete series first. And I have The Scarlet Lion by, obviously, Elizabeth Chadwick. And this is the 3rd book in the William Marshall series. And I, quote unquote, borrowed this from my mother's bookshelf a while ago. And she was never going to read it. She doesn't want it back. William Marshall was a real man who had a very large influence. He appears in the Eleanor of Aquitaine series as well. And then he got his own series exploring his life. And I need to track down the remaining books in this series that I have missed, but I will read you the back of this one. How a hero becomes a legend. Already known as a knight of uncommon skill and honor, William Marshall has earned the friendship of King Richard and the love of a wealthy heiress. But when the Lionheart dies, leaving his treacherous brother John on the throne, William and Isabel need all of their strength and courage to face a shattered world. Their sons held hostage, their integrity at stake, the two must choose between obeying their king or honoring their hearts. Breathing life into history, Elizabeth Chadwick provides a riveting novel of an uncommon marriage between a man of valor and the only woman who could match him. And the other thing I like about her books is that they are not, I say this and I'm looking at one that's, relatively skinny. They're not, these thin little historical glimpses into history, but rather they're meaty without being tomes. So it strikes a nice balance, and tracking down the rest of the William Marshall series, hopefully in matching covers to the one I have, is very high on my list. So, okay, I do have one more completed series by her sitting on my shelves. Again, pretty sure I picked this up for my birthday last year. And that is the Wild Hunts series. And there are 4 books in this series, starting with The Coming of the Wolf, which is the prequel novel. And it is by far the thinnest Elizabeth Chadwick novel I have ever seen. And I will read you the back. The Welsh Borders, 1069. When Ashdyke Manor is attacked, Lady Christian is forced to witness her husband's murder and the pillaging of her lands at the hands of brutal Norman invaders. Miles Le Gaulois calls off the attack, but he has Christian's brother under armed guard and a deal to offer: her brother's freedom for her hand in marriage. Miles and Christian's precarious union invites enemies from all sides, and when Miles is summoned for a lengthy campaign by the king, Kristen is left to watch his lands. In the midst of war, 2 enemies must learn to trust one another if they are to survive. I am so looking forward to diving into this. I need to. And this is, a very short one for her. It's under 300 pages. And for people who have trouble keeping track of characters, she does have in this one a cast of characters, and I've never really actually paid attention to that because I've never had a problem. She does in the Marriage of Lions too. So if you have trouble keeping a cast of characters straight, she apparently lists them in her physical novels. I did not even remotely notice it on the electronic ones. But then again, it's not something I would have paid, mind to. Okay, so the first true novel in the series is The Wild Hunt. And I'll read you the back of this one. Wales, 1098. In the wild, windswept Wales marches, a noble young lord rides for home, embittered, angry, and in danger. He is Guyon, Lord of Ledworth, heir to the threatened lands, husband-to-be of Judith of Ravenstow. Their union will save his estate, but they have yet to meet. This is the turn of the 12th century. Dynasties forged and fight for dominance, and behind the precarious throne of William Rufus, political intrigue rages. Bound in marriage but poles apart, Guyon and Judith are caught up in the turmoil. As a dark secret from the past is revealed, the full storm of war crashes over them. If they are to stand any chance of surviving, they must unite, but that is more easily said than done. And there's not a lot of historical fiction set in Wales, and specifically Wales, after the death of William the Conqueror. I am looking forward to that. Book number 2 is, make sure that's right. This is book number 2, The Running Vixen. And this is Wales 1126. Hulwyn, daughter of Welsh Marches Baron Guyon Fitzmiles, has grown up with her father's ward, Adam de Lacy. There has always been a spark between them. But when Hulwyn marries Ralph de Chevalier, a devastated Adam absents himself on various diplomatic missions for King Henry I. When Ralph is killed in a skirmish, Hulwyn's father considers a new marriage for her with his neighbor's son, Warren de Mortimer. Adam, recently returned to England, has good reason to loathe Warren and is determined not to lose Hulwyn a second time. But Hulwyn is torn between her duty to her father and the pull of her heart. Adam is no longer the awkward boy she remembers, but a man who stirs every fiber of her being, which places them both in great danger, because Warren de Mortier is not a man to be crossed, and the future of a country is at stake. Yeah. I need to read. I'm looking for the cast of characters now. And this one does not have a cast of characters, so I'm guessing there are not a lot of unique names in this book. Okay, the last book of this series is The Leopard Unleashed. And this is Wales in 1139. Reynard, heir to Ravenstow, is a crusader in Antioch, a place far removed from the Welsh marches of his birth. When he is summoned to his ailing father's side, Reynard brings an exotic dancing girl with him to warm his cold bed. But in a political match made by their families, Reynard is already betrothed to the innocent Hélène, and he knows he must return to the duty of marriage. Torn between his mistress and his betrothed, Reynard's personal dilemma is set against a background of increasing civil strife as his greedy neighbor, Ranulph of Chester, strives to take his lands. Reynard is taken prisoner at the Battle of Lincoln. His fate rests with 2 women. His former mistress, now in the bed of his deadliest enemy, and his determined yet inexperienced wife, protecting his lands against terrible odds. I love that this series follows, inheritance strains through, 150 years of Welsh history. And as you can tell from some of the back covers, it's going to deal with realities of life in the 11th and 12th centuries that were normal for the time, and yet are going to be incredibly objectionable to many. And that is unfortunate. It is not a reason not to read the books. You cannot take a 20th century or 21st century now societal norm and apply it to the past and expect it to just be a blanket application that fits. It was different, and rightly so. So, okay, that is Elizabeth Chadwick. She has standalones, she has series, she covers a period of history that doesn't get a lot of attention. The further back you go, the less attention is paid in historical fiction, and early medieval is routinely ignored, unfortunately. So, however, I love it, and I am looking forward to it. And God willing, at least one Elizabeth Chadwick will make it into Dave's 25 and 25. When we get a chance to film that, I will be happy if he chooses one. Let's say I'm trying to guide him to do so. Have you read Chadwick? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe, and I will see you here next time at the Protagonist Pub.